The third floor smelled like warm laundry and the orange disinfectant they used on the handrails. I noticed it the way you notice the hum of a refrigerator, only when something else makes you pay attention. That night, the something else was a phone going off in 312 and not getting picked up. Mrs. Lehrman always picked up. She kept the receiver in a clear plastic bag because she said the buttons made her fingers feel sticky, and she answered on the second ring because her daughter in Beloit called every Sunday and Wednesday at 9. It rang past 9. It rang into 9:12. By the time I came down the corridor with the meds cart, it had gone quiet again, and I didn't think anything of it because nothing on a Wednesday night at Birch Cross Manor required thinking. My name is Rennick Vollmer. I had been working the 7 to 7 at Birch Cross going on 4 years. Before that, paramedic. Before that, army medic. Before that, a kid in Wausau who liked his grandmother more than his parents. None of that matters except to say I was the kind of person who didn't get rattled, which is a useful identity until it isn't. That night I had Hall C, 12 rooms, 8 of them occupied. Mrs. Lehrman in 312, Mr. Doby in 314, the Sandgren sisters sharing 316, Walt Petrie in 318, Enola Crane in 320, an empty in 322, Earl Hovde in 324, and the new admit in 326, whose name I kept blanking on because the chart said Hepzibah, and my mouth refused. I'll get to her. 10 o'clock meds. I rolled the cart to 312 first because Mrs. Lehrman was the easiest. She liked to chat about the weather in a voice that sounded like a screen door, and she always took her pills with apple juice from a Dixie cup. The door was cracked. Her TV was on, the local news out of Eau Claire, sound low. She was in her recliner, eyes open, hands folded. "Evening, Mrs. L." She looked at me without moving her head. That wasn't unusual. Her neck had been bad since February. But her eyes were on me a beat too long, like she was waiting for me to say something I hadn't said yet. "You hear from your daughter?" She called. "Yeah?" She said, "Don't go outside." I laughed because I thought she was joking, and then I didn't laugh because I realized she wasn't. I set the Dixie cup on her side table. The pills, 2 white and 1 pink, rattled into her palm. "Don't go outside, why?" "I don't know. She was crying." I watched her swallow. The pink one always stuck, and she had to chase it with 2 sips. I picked up the cup and rinsed it in her bathroom sink and set it on the radiator to dry the way she liked. On the TV, a woman in a yellow blazer was reading from a piece of paper, and the chyron at the bottom said something about Minneapolis, but the rest had scrolled. I didn't pay attention. I never paid attention to the news at work, because the news at work was always something. A fire in Stevens Point, a recall on baby formula, a senator dying. And none of it changed what I had to do for the next 9 hours. "You want the lights down, Mrs. L?" "Leave them. I'm not sleeping yet." I closed her door soft and moved on. Mr. Doby was already asleep in 314, mouth open, oxygen hissing. I left his pills in the little paper cup on his tray for the morning shift to deal with. The Sandgren sisters were both up, Vi knitting, Della watching her knit, both of them in matching housecoats the color of old peaches. They took their meds without a word. Della touched my wrist as I turned to leave, which she sometimes did, and said, "There's something on the radio." And Vi said, "There's always something on the radio." And Della pulled her hand back and said nothing else. I checked my phone in the hallway between 316 and 318. It was 10:14. 3 texts from my brother Cale, which was unusual because Cale didn't text. The first one said, "You up?" The second one said, "Call me." The third one was a link to a news article I didn't open. I figured he was drunk. He got like that sometimes after a fight with Renee, and he'd want to talk for 40 minutes about how she didn't understand him, and I'd say, mm-hmm, until he ran out of breath. I put the phone back in my pocket. Walt Petrie in 318 was in the bathroom. I waited. I could hear him talking to himself in there, low, the way he did, narrating his own movements. Okay, all right, here we go. Easy now. He'd been a long-haul trucker out of Green Bay, and he still did that thing of talking through tasks like he was on a CB. When he came out, he was zipping his fly with one hand and holding the wall with the other, and he looked at me like he was glad I was there, but didn't want to say so. Rennie. Walt. Pills. Yeah, he took them dry, which I'd told him not to do, and which he did anyway, every night. You hear about it? About what? He looked at me. His face wasn't doing what it usually did. Walt's face was almost always set in a kind of weary good humor, like a man who'd been told the same joke twice and was being polite about it. Tonight, it was flatter than that. Riots, or something, down in the cities. Which cities? Both of them. Minneapolis, St. Paul. They were saying it on Channel 13. Saying what? I don't know, Rennie. They cut to commercial. I told him I'd check on him later, and I closed the door, and I stood in the hallway for a second with my hand still on the knob. The hallway carpet at Birch Cross was a kind of mottled green and gold pattern that hid stains. The fluorescent at the far end by the supply closet had been buzzing for 2 weeks, and we'd put in a work order, and nothing had happened. I listened to it buzz. I took my phone back out. Kale's link was a local TV affiliate. The page loaded slow. The headline was, Multiple incidents reported at Hennepin County Medical Center. Officials urge calm. The article had 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph said there were reports of violent altercations involving patients and staff. The second said the hospital had been placed on lockdown. The third said the governor's office had not yet responded to a request for comment. There was no video. There were no names. There was a stock photo of an ambulance. I scrolled to the comments and stopped myself. Comments were never useful and always bad for me. I went back to the cart and pushed it to 320. Enola Crane was sitting up in bed with the lamp on and a paperback face down on her chest. She'd been a librarian at the public library in Marshfield for 36 years. Her hair was the color of dryer lint, and she kept it in a braid down one shoulder. She looked at me and said, "You look tired," which she always said. And I said, "I'm always tired, Mrs. Crane," which I always said. My nephew called. Yeah? He's in Rochester. He says they're not letting people leave the hospital. Which hospital? Mayo. I gave her the pills. She took them slowly. She watched me the whole time, not unkindly, but with a kind of attention I wasn't used to from her. She usually treated me like a piece of furniture she was fond of. He said it's spreading. What is? He didn't know what to call it. I told her to get some rest. She said she would. She didn't pick the paperback back up. Empty room at 322. I skipped it. Earl Hovde in 324 had his door closed, which meant he was already down for the night. Earl was 91 and slept 12 hours a day and was sharper when he was awake than most people I knew when they were caffeinated. Korean War, then 40 years at a paper mill in Mosinee, then a wife who died, then this. I knocked twice anyway. No answer. I cracked the door. He was on his side, breathing slow and even. I left his cup on the nightstand. 326 was the new admit. Hepzibah Auerbach. She'd come in 3 days ago from a hospital in Madison after a fall, and she hadn't said more than 4 words to anyone since she arrived. The chart said dementia, mild, with periods of clarity. The chart also said she had been a violinist with the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra for 41 years, and that her husband had died in 2019, and her son lived in Tel Aviv and was on a flight. The flight had been 3 days ago. Nobody had heard from him. I knocked. No answer. I went in. She was sitting at the little desk by the window in her nightgown, looking out. The window faced the parking lot and the line of poplars behind it and the road beyond that, County Highway BB, which ran from Birch Cross to the interstate 4 miles north. There were no cars on it that I could see. There usually weren't this time of night.
Mrs. Auerbach, I have your pills.
She didn't turn. She said, in a voice that didn't sound like dementia at all, "There's a man in the field." I went to the window. The poplars made it hard to see. The field beyond them was the back 40 of the Mensch farm, soybeans in summer, stubble now. I looked. I didn't see anyone. "Where, Mrs. Auerbach?" "He was walking funny." "How funny?" "Like he was drunk, but not drunk." I looked again. Nothing. The field was dark, and the moon was a quarter, and the poplars moved in a low wind. I told her sometimes the eyes played tricks at night, and she said, without any heat, "I know what my eyes do." And I felt embarrassed, and I gave her her pills, and she took them, and I left. In the corridor, I checked the phone again. 10:38. 2 more texts from Cale. "Call me when you can." And then, seriously. I went to the nurse's station. The night charge was a woman named Penna Wholesome, who'd been at Birch Cross longer than I'd been alive. She was at the desk with both hands flat on it, and her glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the desk phone in her ear, and she was nodding to nobody. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I hear you. Okay. She hung up. She didn't look at me. Penna. That was corporate. Corporate calls at 10:30? They said be ready. For what? They didn't say. I waited. She put her glasses back down on her nose and looked at me through them like she was deciding whether I was worth telling. They said keep the residents inside. They said don't let anyone in who isn't family with ID. They said if I have to call somebody, call the local police first and not 911. Why? They said 911 is overwhelmed. I felt something move in my stomach that wasn't fear yet, but was the thing that comes before fear, the way a dog hears the truck before you do. Overwhelmed by what? They didn't say, Rennie. She picked up her coffee and drank from it, and put it down, and picked up the phone again and started dialing somebody. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, and then I went back to the meds cart and pushed it to the alcove and sat down on the rolling stool and took out my phone and called Cale. He picked up on the first ring. Where are you? Work. What's going on? You need to leave work. I can't leave work. I have residence. Rennie. There was a noise in the background, like a TV turned up too loud, and another noise behind it, like a siren. Rennie, listen. Renee's parents are in St. Paul. They were on FaceTime an hour ago. There were people in the street. People, listen to me, people biting people. I waited. He didn't say anything else. What? That's what she saw. She saw it on FaceTime. Her dad ran out of the room with the phone, and the phone fell, and they could hear her mother screaming. and then it cut out. And we've been calling, and we can't get through. And it's on the news now. It's on the news. They're not saying biting, but they're saying attacks. They're saying contagion. They're saying don't go out. Kale, I'm putting Renee in the car. We're going to her uncle's in Spooner. You should get in your car and go. I have 8 residents. Rennie. I have 8 residents, Kale. Then call somebody. Call your boss. Call somebody. But don't stay there. Don't stay there because you're being responsible. They're going to come. Who's going to come? He didn't answer. The line was open. I could hear him breathing. I could hear Renee in the background saying, "We have to go, we have to go, we have to go." "I love you," he said. "Pick up your phone." He hung up. I sat on the stool for what I think was a minute and might have been 5. I looked at the wall. The wall was the same color it had been at 7. The fluorescent was still buzzing. The hallway smelled like warm laundry and orange disinfectant. I called my supervisor, Marley. It went to voicemail. I called the assistant administrator. Voicemail. I called the corporate line. A recorded message said, "Due to unusually high call volume, please try again later." I sat with the phone in my hand and I thought, this is not happening. This is not happening here. And then I thought, but it might be happening. And then I thought, I should turn on the TV. The day room TV was already on. I hadn't turned it off after dinner. I walked there with my phone still in my hand. The day room was empty because everybody was in their rooms by now. The TV was on the local affiliate, the one Kale had sent me. The sound was off. I turned it up. A woman at a desk was talking too fast. The chyron said, "Developing. Widespread violence across upper Midwest." They cut to a shaky shot of a street I didn't recognize. A man on the ground, 2 people standing over him. Then the camera jerked and the feed cut to bars and tone for half a second. And then back to the woman at the desk, who was now visibly trying not to cry. She said, "We are being told by authorities not to approach anyone exhibiting these symptoms. We are being told that emergency services are stretched. We are being told—" She stopped. She listened to her earpiece. She said, "We're going to commercial." There was no commercial. The screen went black. Then it came back to a different anchor, in a different studio, saying the same things with different words. I turned the sound off. I stood in the day room in the half-dark with the TV's flicker on the wall, and I felt my chest move the way it moves when you're trying to slow it down on purpose. I thought about Mrs. Lehrman's daughter, saying, "Don't go outside." I thought about Walt, saying, "Riots." I thought about Enola's nephew at Mayo. I thought about Hepzibah seeing a man in the field walking funny, but not drunk. I thought about how all of those were just stories somebody had told me until 10 minutes ago, and how they were now something else. I went to the window at the end of the hall, the big one over the front entrance. The parking lot had 8 cars in it. Mine, Penna's, the night CNA's, Marley's even though Marley wasn't here, a maintenance truck, and 3 I didn't recognize. The streetlight above the entrance was on. The road past the lot was dark. I could see the sign at the edge of the property, Birch Cross Manor, a quiet place to belong. And beyond the sign, the long, flat curve of County BB. And beyond that, nothing. Then I saw movement at the far end of the lot, near the dumpster. Someone walking. Slow. Not stumbling exactly, but not walking right either. The way a man walks when his hip is bad, and he doesn't want anyone to know. Except his arms hung wrong. Except his head was down at an angle his neck shouldn't have allowed. I stepped back from the window. My breath fogged the glass where my mouth had been. I hadn't realized I'd been that close to it. I went back to the nurse's station. Penna was off the phone. She was looking at the monitor that showed the lobby camera. The lobby was empty. The front doors were locked from the inside the way they always were after 8. She didn't look up. Penna, I see him. Who? I don't know who. What do we do? She finally looked at me. Her face had gone the color of paper. Corporate said keep them inside. There's a man in the lot who isn't. I know, Rennie. He isn't right. I know. We watched the monitor. The man, if he was a man, didn't come toward the building. He moved along the back of the lot, past the dumpster, and disappeared behind the maintenance shed. He didn't come back out. I said, I'm going to start getting them up. What? The residents. I'm going to start getting them up and dressed. Rennie, corporate said, Penna. Corporate is in Milwaukee. Corporate is not here. She didn't say anything. I waited for her to argue. She didn't. The van, I said. Which van? The 15-passenger.
The one we use for the church trip.
It's in the back lot. Marley has the keys. There's a spare in the safe. Yeah. Open the safe. She looked at me for a long moment. I have thought about that look many times since. I think she was hoping I'd back down so she wouldn't have to choose. When I didn't back down, her face changed in a small way I couldn't name, and she got up and went to the back office. I started with Earl because Earl was the heaviest sleeper and would take the longest. I knocked once and went in and turned on the lamp. He didn't move. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my hand on his shoulder. Earl. Earl, I need you to wake up. What time is it? Almost 11. What? There's a problem. I need you to get dressed. I need you to come with me. He opened his eyes. They were sharper than they had any right to be at 91 in the middle of the night. He looked at my face. He didn't ask what kind of problem. He sat up. My pants are on the chair.
Okay. My shoes.
I'll get them.
I helped him into his pants and his shoes and a flannel over his pajama top. He didn't speak the whole time. When he was upright with his cane, he said, Where are we going? And I said, I don't know yet. And he said, All right. And that was the only conversation we had about it. I went to Walt next because Walt would be quickest. He was already half awake. He had heard me in the hallway. He said, Riots got here, didn't they? And I said, Something got here. And he said, Give me my boots. And he laced them himself with hands that didn't shake the way I expected them to. I went to Mrs. Lehrman. She was still in her recliner with the TV still on. The TV was now showing color bars. I told her we were leaving. She said, I knew when she called. I knew. And she let me help her into her coat. She wanted her bag. I got her bag. She wanted the framed picture of her husband from the dresser. I put it in the bag. Enola Crane was already dressed.
She had her coat on. She had a small canvas tote with 2 paperbacks and her wallet and what looked like a flashlight. She had been waiting. She didn't say anything. She just stood up when I came in. The Sandgren sisters were difficult. Vi understood right away. Della didn't. Della kept saying, but our things, and Vi said, Della, we'll come back for our things. And Della looked at her like she'd been slapped, and Vi said, more softly, Della, please. And Della started to cry without sound and let me put her coat on. Mr. Doby in 314 wouldn't wake up. I shook him harder than I meant to. He opened his eyes finally and said, What? And then he said, I'm not going anywhere. And I said, Mr. Doby, we have to go. And he said, I'm tethered. Look at me. I'm tethered. And he was right. His oxygen line was 12 feet long and ran to the concentrator on the wall, and he had a portable tank in the closet, and I'd forgotten about it because I'd been moving too fast. I got the portable. I switched him over. He watched me do it without helping. When I had him on the portable, he said, "How long does this last?" And I said, 4 hours at 2 liters. And he said, "And then what?" And I didn't have an answer for that, and he saw that I didn't, and he nodded once like a man making peace with something, and let me help him into his slippers. Hepzibah Auerbach was the last. She was still at the window. She hadn't moved. When I came in, she said, without turning, "There are 3 of them now." And I went to the window, and she was right. There were 3 figures in the field, moving the same wrong way, slow, in a loose triangle. I told her we were leaving. She said, "Good," and stood up and put on her own coat and picked up a leather case from beside the bed. The case was the size of a violin, but flatter. I didn't ask. I had them all in the hallway by 11:14. 7 residents, Earl with his cane, Walt walking on his own, Mrs. Lehrman on my arm, Enola steady, Vi steadying Della, Mr. Doby with the green tank slung over his shoulder on its strap, Hepzibah with her case. The hallway felt crowded in a way it never had. Their breathing made a small chorus. Somebody's slipper scuffed. The fluorescent buzzed. Penna came back with the keys. Her hand was shaking. She put them in mine and closed my fingers around them. "You want to come," I said. "I have to stay." Penna. "I have residents on A and B. I'm not leaving them with Charisse. She's 23. "Bring them down. We can—" "There's not enough room in your van for 19 people, Rennie." I looked at her. She was right. I had counted the seats without thinking about A and B halls. There were 32 residents on the floor. I had 7 of mine. Penna had 17 between her and the CNA. We could not fit all of them. We could not fit half of them. We could fit my hall, and only barely. "I'll come back," I said. "Don't make promises." "I'll come back." She put her hand flat on my chest. It was the most physical contact we had ever had. She said, "Drive careful," and turned and went down the hall toward A. We took the service elevator because the main one was slow. It was a tight fit. Mr. Doby's tank knocked against the wall. Della was crying steadily now into Vi's shoulder. Earl was watching the floor numbers tick with an expression I could not read. The elevator took 14 seconds to descend 1 floor. I counted. The back door opened onto the staff lot, which was lit by 2 sodium lamps. The van was the second vehicle from the end, white, the words Birch Cross Manor on the side in faded blue. I unlocked it from the fob. The interior light came on. 4 bench rows, 3 seats each, plus the passenger seat. 12 passenger seats. I had 7. Plenty. I loaded Earl first because he could climb in and settle. Then Walt. Then Mr. Doby and his tank, who needed the seat by the side door for the strap. Then Enola, who took the back row by herself, which she preferred. Then the Sandgren sisters, side by side. Then Mrs. Lehrman, who I lifted in because her knees gave at the step. Then Hepzibah, who climbed in unaided and sat in the row directly behind the passenger seat with her case across her lap. I closed the side door. I went around to the driver's side. Before I got in, I looked back at the building. Penna was at the window of the second floor. She raised one hand. I raised mine. She didn't turn away. I got in the van and I started it, and the diesel coughed and caught, and the dashboard lit up amber. The fuel gauge read 3/4. The clock read 11:23. I sat with my hands on the wheel for 2 seconds and I thought, I have no plan. And then I thought, the plan is north, away from the cities. And then I thought, that's not a plan, that's a direction. And then Walt said from the second row, Rennie, you driving or thinking? I put it in drive. We came out of the staff lot onto the access road. The headlights swept the front of the building, and the sign, and the dumpster, and the maintenance shed. Nothing moved. The man, the thing, whatever it had been, was not where I had seen it. I turned onto County BB and pointed the van north. The road was empty. The road was always empty this time of night, but tonight the emptiness felt different, like a held breath. The dashes on the center line ticked under the headlights, one after another, in even intervals. The poplars on either side were dark and tall. In the rear view, I could see the residents' faces lit faintly by the dash, each one a separate quiet. Earl said from the back, "Where are we headed?" "North." "North where?" "I have a brother in Spooner. He's going there. We could—" "Spooner's 2 hours. You got that much fuel?" "3/4. I think so." "You think so?" "Yes." He didn't push. I appreciated that. Mrs. Lehrman said, "I have to use the bathroom." I said, "We just left, Mrs. L. Can you hold it?" "Maybe." "There's a bottle in the door." That wasn't true. I said it because my mouth said it. She didn't answer. We drove for 8 minutes before we saw anything. A pickup truck was pulled off on the shoulder with its lights on and its driver's door open and nobody in the cab. I slowed. I didn't stop. Walt said, "Don't stop." And I said, "I'm not stopping." And we went past it at 30 and accelerated again on the other side. In the rear view, the truck got smaller and the lights stayed on and nobody came out of the dark to claim it. At the intersection of County BB and Highway 29, there was a stop sign and a flashing yellow over the road and a gas station that was closed for the night. I stopped at the sign because the part of me that had been driving for 20 years did. I looked left toward the on-ramp for the interstate. I looked right toward the small town of Quill, population 1,140, where I sometimes got coffee on the way home. The traffic light at the center of Quill, which I could just see from here, was flashing red on all 4 sides instead of cycling. Power was out, or the light had been switched to flashing, which they did during accidents. I turned right toward Quill anyway, because the interstate was where the people would be, and people, tonight, were what I wanted to avoid. Enola spoke for the first time. She said, "The library in Quill has a generator." "Does it?" "It's a designated emergency shelter. Or it used to be. I don't know if they kept it up." I didn't say anything. I filed it. Quill came up fast. 2 blocks of storefronts, a diner that was usually open until 2, a bar that was usually open until close, a hardware store, a pharmacy, the library on the corner of Main and Spruce, the one stoplight blinking red. The diner's lights were on, but I didn't see anyone through the windows. The bar's lights were off. There was a car parked diagonally across 2 spaces in front of the pharmacy, with its passenger door open. I didn't slow down. At the second intersection, where Main met what locals called the cutoff, a man stepped into the street. I braked hard. The residents pitched forward. Mrs. Lehrman made a small noise. The man was in the headlights for maybe 2 full seconds, and in those 2 seconds, I saw 3 things. He was wearing pajama bottoms and a denim jacket. His face was wet with something that looked dark in the headlights and might not have been blood, but probably was. And he was not walking. He was running, but wrong. His legs not finding the rhythm of running.
his arms not swinging. His head pointed at the van like the van was a target. I didn't think. I put the van in reverse, and I looked over my shoulder, and I backed up 40 feet, and I cut the wheel, and I pulled into the parking lot of the diner, and I turned around, and I was back on Main going the other way before my brain caught up with my hands. In the rear view, the man was still in the street. Then he was running after us. Then the road bent, and he was gone. Walt said, "Rennie, I see him. He's not the only one." He was right. There were 2 more on the sidewalk by the pharmacy now, and 1 in the doorway of the bar, and I had not seen any of them when we came through 30 seconds ago. They had not been there. Or they had been there, and I had not been looking. Either way, the math of the town had changed in less than a minute. I drove. I took the cutoff because the cutoff went around Quill and rejoined Highway 29 on the other side. And I did not want to go through Quill again. The cutoff was unlit and narrow and lined with cornfields. The headlights made a tunnel. The residents had gone quiet. Even Della had stopped crying. "I'm sorry about the break," I said, to nobody in particular. "He did fine," Earl said. I don't know why that mattered to me. It mattered. We rejoined 29 north of town. The road opened up. The cornfields gave way to pasture and then to the long, swampy stretch by the Pine River. I drove at 50 because 50 felt like the speed at which I could still react to something in the road. The dashboard clock read 11:47. Mr. Doby said, "I'm at 3 liters. 3 liters? I turned it up. I was getting short. How long does that give you? Less. I did not have a good answer for that. I said, "There's a hospital in Stratford. That's 20 minutes. We can—" Rennie. That was Hepzibah. I had not heard her speak in any sustained way before. Her voice was lower than I had expected, and steadier, and had an accent I couldn't place. Not quite German, not quite something else. "There won't be a hospital." "Mrs. Auerbach, there won't be a hospital, Rennie. They said on the radio before you came in. The hospitals are where it started." "Where what started?" "What you saw in town." I didn't argue. I looked at her in the rear view. She was looking back at me. Her eyes in the dashlight were very dark. Her hands rested on the leather case in her lap. "What's in the case?" I said, because I needed to say something, and I had been wondering. "Sheet music, a photograph, a letter from my son." "Not the violin." "I sold the violin in 2004. "Why?" "Because I stopped being able to play it well, and I did not want to play it badly." I drove. Nobody said anything for a while. The road unrolled. A deer crossed 100 yards ahead, and I slowed and let it go. Della had fallen asleep against Vi's shoulder. Vi was awake, eyes on the back of my seat. Mrs. Lehrman was murmuring to herself, something that might have been a prayer or might have been a grocery list. Walt was watching the side mirror. Earl had his cane upright between his knees, and his hands folded over its head, and his eyes closed, but I could tell he wasn't asleep. Enola said, "There's a turnoff at the next mile marker. It's the old county road. It goes up through the Mensch farm and meets 29 again past Stratford. It's slower, but it bypasses everything." "How do you know that?" "My husband worked for the county for 30 years. I took the turnoff. It was unmarked and unpaved, and I almost missed it. The van rocked into the dirt, and the residents made small sounds, and we were on a track between 2 hayfields with no streetlights and no signs, and only the headlights and the sound of the diesel. The track ran for 2 miles and dropped into a hollow and climbed out and ran along a ridge for another 3 miles.
we saw nothing. We passed 2 farmhouses, both with lights on, both with curtains drawn, both with their long driveways already blocked by pickup trucks turned sideways like fences. People had figured it out faster than I had. I had been pushing a meds cart. They had been awake and watching their phones, and they had known to put the truck across the driveway and turn off the porch light. I felt, for the first time, the specific weight of having been late. Not stupid, not cowardly. Late. I had answered the meds bell instead of the news. I had thought of Cale's texts as Cale being Cale. I had given Mrs. Lehrman her pink pill and rinsed her cup while a city 2 hours south was eating itself. I was here now, on a county road I didn't know, with 7 people who depended on me, because I had been 40 minutes slower than the people in those farmhouses. I touched the thing in my left jacket pocket without thinking. A small wooden bird my grandmother had carved. A wren. She had given it to me when I was 9. I had carried it in every uniform pocket I had ever owned. I touched it. I put my hand back on the wheel. The track came out at a T intersection, with a paved road I didn't recognize. There was a road sign, hand-painted, pointing left. Henning 4. I did not know Henning. I went left because right looked the same, and I had to choose. Henning turned out to be a crossroads and a feed store, both dark. I drove through it without stopping. Past Henning, the road climbed into low wooded hills. The trees closed in. The sky narrowed. The headlights felt smaller. At 12:14, the engine made a sound it shouldn't have. A small ticking, then a smoothness. Then the temperature gauge began to climb. I watched it climb for 90 seconds before I admitted what I was watching. The needle moved from the middle of the gauge to 2/3, and then to 3/4, and then I could feel it in the pedal, the engine working harder for the same speed. "What's that smell?" Vi said. "What smell?" "Sweet, like syrup." Coolant. The van was losing coolant. I didn't know where from or how fast, and I did not have the equipment or the daylight to find out. The needle was at the red. "I have to pull over." "Don't pull over here," Walt said. "I have to. I can't drive it red. I'll seize it." "Then we're stuck." "I know." I pulled onto the shoulder. The shoulder was narrow and the ditch on the right was deep. I left the engine running for a second and then turned it off because running it red was worse than turning it off. The headlights stayed on the parking setting. The dashboard amber faded. The silence after the engine was bigger than I expected. I had been listening to the diesel for almost an hour, and I had not realized how much it had been doing for me. Without it, I could hear the residents breathing, all 7 of them, and the wind in the trees, and somewhere far off, a sound I told myself was a coyote. "I'm going to look under the hood." "Rennie," Walt said. "I have to know if it's something I can fix." "Take the flashlight." "I have my phone." "Take Enola's flashlight. Phones die." Enola handed her flashlight forward without comment. It was a small maglite, heavy for its size, and it threw a tight, clean beam. I took it. I got out. The cold hit me first. I had not registered the cold from inside. It was October in central Wisconsin, and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and there was a damp in it that promised frost by morning. My breath made a cloud. I went around to the front of the van, and I propped the hood, and I shone the maglite into the engine compartment. The coolant was sprayed across the upper radiator hose and along the underside of the hood, and it had pooled on the manifold where it was steaming gently. The hose itself had a split along the seam. Old hose. Hadn't been changed when it should have been. Birchcross had been deferring maintenance on the van for 3 years because we only used it for the church trip and the occasional doctor's appointment, and corporate kept saying, next quarter. I could limp it, maybe, if the split didn't get bigger. I could top off the coolant, if I had coolant, which I didn't. I could tape the hose with something, but I didn't have anything that would hold under heat. Or I could keep driving until it seized, and then we would be stuck somewhere worse. I closed the hood. I got back in the van. I told them. "How far can we go?" Earl said. "I don't know. A few miles, maybe 10, maybe 2. "Where to?" "I don't know." Hepzibah said, "There was a sign 2 miles back, a church camp." I didn't see it. It was on the right, white sign, black letters. Pine Hollow Bible Camp, half a mile. I didn't see it. "You were watching the road." I looked at her in the rear view. She looked back. She was, I realized, the only one of the 7 who had probably been watching for shelter the entire time we had been driving. Everybody else had been watching me, or the road, or the dark. She had been reading. 2 miles back. Yes. Toward Henning. Yes. I considered. A church camp in October would be empty. It would have buildings. It might have a generator or a well with a hand pump, or at least a shelter from the road. It would be off the road, which mattered, because anything we did from here was going to involve being on the road or off it. We turn around. I started the van. The temperature gauge was still at the red, but had stopped climbing because the engine had cooled. I made a 3-point turn on the narrow road, slowly, because the ditch was deep, and we headed back the way we had come. At 1.5 miles, I saw the sign. Hepzibah had been right about the color and right about the lettering. Pine Hollow Bible Camp, half a mile, with an arrow pointing down a gravel drive into the trees. I turned in. The drive went a 1/4 mile through pines and opened into a clearing. There was a main lodge with a peaked roof and a covered porch, 4 small cabins arranged in a semicircle, a flagpole with no flag, and a fire ring. No vehicles. No lights. The lodge had a hand-lettered sign on the door that I read as we pulled up. Season ended October 5th. See you next June. I stopped the van in front of the lodge and turned off the engine. The temperature gauge was still red. We had made it. Barely. "Stay in the van," I said. "I'm going to check the lodge." Walt said, "I'll come." Walt, "My back's fine. I'll come." I let him come because I needed somebody, and because Walt, at 78, was probably the most useful person in the van, other than me. I gave Enola's flashlight to Earl in case they needed it, and I took my phone with the flashlight on. Walt got out slowly. We went to the lodge porch. The door was locked. There was a key box on the wall by the door, a combination type, the kind they use for vacation rentals. I tried 1, 2, 3, 4. I tried 0000. I tried the year, 2025. The third one opened it. The key was inside. I unlocked the door. The lodge was cold and smelled like pine cleaner and old smoke. There was a great room with a stone fireplace and mismatched couches and a long dining table. A kitchen at the back with a propane stove. A bunk room off to the side. A door marked office. I checked the office. Phone on the desk, dead. Computer, off. Filing cabinet. A laminated sheet on the wall with emergency procedures. Generator in the shed behind the lodge, the sheet said. Propane tank for heat. Well water with electric pump, which would not work without the generator. Outhouse behind the cabins for septic emergencies. I told Walt. Walt said, "Generator first." We went out the back. The shed was unlocked. The generator was a Honda, mid-size, gas. There was a 5-gallon can next to it that, when I lifted it, sloshed about half full. There was a pull cord. I primed it. I pulled. It coughed. I pulled again. It caught. I let it run. The shed light came on. A bulb came on inside the lodge through the back window. We had power. Not much, but some. I went back to the van. I opened the side door. The residents looked at me. There's a lodge. There's heat, I think, if I can figure out the propane. There's water if the well pump works. There's a bunk room. I'd like to bring you all inside. Earl said, "Well, get on with it then." I got them in one at a time. Mrs. Lehrman last, because she was the slowest. Mr. Doby with the tank, which read 40 minutes at 3 liters. I helped him to the couch nearest the fireplace, and I told him I'd find a way to get him on something else, and he nodded because he didn't believe me, and I didn't either. Walt found the propane valve by the kitchen and turned it on and lit the pilot, and the heater in the great room kicked on with a soft whoomp. Vi found a stack of wool blankets in a cedar chest and started passing them out without being asked. Enola walked the perimeter of the great room with her flashlight, checking the windows, and reported back that all of them locked from the inside, and that the curtains were heavy and would block the light. Hepzibah sat in a wingback chair by the fireplace with her case on her lap and watched all of us work. I locked the front door. I locked the back door. I checked the bunkroom windows. I went outside and walked the clearing once with the mag light, low, sweeping the tree line. I saw nothing. I heard nothing except the generator and, in the distance, the same coyote sound from before, which I now thought was probably not a coyote, but couldn't place. I came back in. I sat on the hearth with my back to the fire. I looked at them. Earl in the recliner. Walt in the corner of the long couch. Mrs. Lehrman beside Walt with her bag in her lap. The Sandgren sisters on the love seat, Della asleep against Vi. Enola in the kitchen, going through the cabinets methodically. Hepzibah in the wingback, eyes half closed. Mr. Doby on the couch nearest me with the tank reading 38. I had not failed yet. I had also not succeeded. I had bought us a few hours, and the cost was the van, which was now leaking coolant in front of the lodge. And the cost was the 17 residents and Penna and Charisse back at Birchcross, who I had told I would come back for, and would not be coming back for tonight, or tomorrow, or possibly ever. And the cost was a portable oxygen tank reading 38 minutes that I could not refill. I touched the wren in my pocket. Mr. Doby said, "Rennie." "Yeah. Don't take the tank off me when it runs out." "Mr. Doby, I'd rather know I'm running low than not know. Don't try to spare me." "Okay. I had 82 years. That's not nothing." "Okay." He turned his face toward the fire and closed his eyes. The hiss of the regulator was soft and even. Enola came out of the kitchen with 2 cans of peaches and a sleeve of crackers and a jar of peanut butter and a roll of paper towels. She set them on the dining table. "There's more," she said. "Soup, beans, coffee if anyone wants coffee." "Coffee," Walt said. "I'll start it." She went back into the kitchen. The propane stove ticked and lit. The smell of coffee came in slowly on a current of warm air from the heater. It smelled, for a moment, like a normal morning at a normal place, and I closed my eyes for 2 seconds and let it be that. When I opened them, Hepzibah was looking at me from across the room. "Rennie," she said, "what is your plan?" "I don't have one yet." "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow I don't know. I have to fix the van or find another vehicle. There's a road going north out of here. It probably joins something.
I have to. You have to sleep first. You will not be useful to us tired. I looked at her. She was right, and I knew she was right, and I had been planning to stay up the entire night and watch the windows because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. Walt said, "I'll take the first watch." Walt. I drove a route through Iowa for 31 years on no sleep.
I can do 4 hours in a chair. Earl can do the second, Earl said, without opening his eyes. I never sleep past 3 anyway. I'll do third, Enola said from the kitchen. I sat on the hearth with my hands hanging between my knees, and I thought about how I had spent the last 90 minutes assuming I was the one keeping these people alive, and how, in the last 4 minutes, 3 of them had organized themselves into a watch rotation without asking me. I had thought of them as my responsibility. They had thought of themselves as a crew. I said, "Okay." Walt said, "Rennie, sleep." I went to the bunk room. I lay down on a lower bunk with my boots on. I put the mag light on the floor next to me. I put my phone on the pillow. I closed my eyes, and I expected not to sleep, and I slept inside of 2 minutes. I dreamed of the meds cart. I was pushing it down a hallway that had no end, and the wheels were squeaking, and I knew I was supposed to stop at a door, but the doors had no numbers. The dream wasn't urgent. It was just long. I woke at 4:11 by my phone. Earl was in the doorway of the bunk room. He didn't say anything. He just stood there and waited until I sat up. "What?" "There's somebody outside." "Where?" "Tree line, north side." Walt saw him first. We watched for a few minutes to be sure. Sure of what? That he wasn't ours. I got up. I followed Earl back to the great room. Walt was at the north window with one of the heavy curtains pulled aside an inch. The fire had burned down. The generator was still running. Mr. Doby was asleep, the regulator now reading 12. "Where?" I said. "Behind the second cabin. He came out of the trees about 15 minutes ago and he hasn't moved since." I looked. The clearing was lit faintly by the spill from the lodge windows and by the half moon that had risen while I slept. The cabins were dark blocks. Behind the second one I could see a shape, vertical, still. A man, or what had been one. He was standing the way they stood in old paintings, weight unevenly distributed, head tilted. He was not approaching. He was just there. Has he made any sound? No. Has he looked at the lodge? He's been looking at the lodge the whole time. I watched him. He didn't move. After a minute, his head tilted the other way, slow, like a dog hearing something far off. After another minute, he took 2 steps toward the lodge and stopped. "He knows we're here," Walt said. "Yeah. He's deciding." "They decide?" "I don't know. He's doing something." I thought about waking everyone and loading them back in the van and trying to make Stratford on a leaking radiator. I thought about staying and waiting for him to commit and dealing with him then. I thought about the noise the generator was making, which I had stopped hearing, but which he certainly hadn't. "The generator," I said. "What about it?" "He can hear it. That's how he found us." "Probably." "If I shut it off..." "You shut it off and we have no light, and no propane igniter, and no well. And maybe he still knows we're here." "Yeah." We stood at the window. The shape took 2 more steps. Then it stopped. Then it turned its head toward the woods behind it, sharply, like it had heard something. Then, without any sound that reached us through the glass, it went back into the trees and was gone. We waited. It didn't come back. Walt let the curtain fall. He looked at me. His face in the dim light looked older than I had ever seen it, and also, somehow, less tired. Rennie? Yeah. We need to leave at first light. I know. The van, I'll figure out the van. Or I won't, and we'll find something else. There's a farmhouse 2 miles back on Henning. There were trucks in the driveway. They were home. You think they'll help us? I don't know. I think we have to ask. 8 people show up at a farmhouse at dawn. 7. I'll go alone first. He looked at me a long moment. Then he said, "All right," and moved his chair to the other window and sat down. I went and sat by Mr. Doby. The regulator read 10. He was breathing slow, but his chest was working hard. I put my hand on his arm. He didn't open his eyes, but he turned his hand over and took mine and held it, light, the way an old man holds something he doesn't want to break. Rennie? Yeah. Is it morning? Almost. Good. He breathed. I watched the regulator. 8. 7. He didn't speak again. At 6, his hand loosened in mine, not letting go but not holding either. At 4, his breathing changed, slowing into something that wasn't quite sleep. I sat with him. Walt watched the window. Earl had come back from the bunk room and was sitting on the hearth. Vi was awake now and watching me, not crying, not saying anything. Hepzibah had not moved from the wingback, but her eyes were open. The regulator read 2 when his breathing stopped. It was so quiet, I almost missed it. I felt his hand cool in mine, slow, like a stone giving up the day's heat. I sat there for what was either a long time or a short one. I closed his eyes with my thumb. I unhooked the cannula from his face and turned the tank off. The hiss stopped. The room was very quiet. Vi said softly, "I'm sorry, Rennie." I said, "Yeah." I had known him for 2.5 years. He had been a postmaster in Antigo before he retired. He had a son in Phoenix who called every other Sunday. He had liked black coffee with 2 sugars and crossword puzzles he never finished. He had told me once, the only time we ever talked about anything other than his oxygen and his schedule, that he had been afraid of dying for 60 years and had stopped being afraid the morning his wife died, because he realized that whatever it was, she'd already done it. And she had never been smarter than him about anything difficult, so it must not be that hard. I sat with him another minute. Then I stood up. I covered him with one of Vi's wool blankets, all the way to the chin. I left his face uncovered because that felt like the right thing. "We leave at light," I said. Earl said, "What about him?" "We can't take him." "I know. I'll come back." "Rennie." "I'll come back for him." Earl looked at me and didn't answer, and that was its own answer. The first gray came at 5:40. I had not slept again. I had sat by the window with Walt, and we had not spoken. The shape did not return. Other shapes might have moved at the edge of the trees, but I could not be sure if they were shapes or my eyes. By 6, the clearing was visible in flat dawn light, frost on the grass, the cabin's dark squares, the van still where I had left it, with its hood faintly steaming where the engine had finally given up the last of its warmth. I went to the van. I opened the hood again. In daylight, the split in the hose was bigger than I had thought. There was no fixing it without parts. I closed the hood. I walked the half-mile of the drive to the road. The road was empty. I walked another quarter-mile toward Henning until I could see, through the trees, the farmhouse with the trucks in the driveway. The lights were still on. Smoke came from the chimney. There was a man on the porch with a rifle across his lap and a coffee cup in his hand. He saw me before I saw him. He didn't raise the rifle. He just watched. I stopped at the edge of his property. I put both hands up, palms out, low, not surrendering, just visible. "I've got 6 people in a lodge half a mile back," I called. "Elderly. Our van's broken down. I'm not asking to come in. I'm asking if there's a vehicle in the county that could get us to Stratford or Spooner." He looked at me. He drank from his cup. He set the cup down on the railing. He said, "Stratford's gone. Spooner. Maybe. I just need transport. I'll trade. I have medical training. I have—" "Come up to the porch." Slow. I came up to the porch. He was younger than I had thought from the road, maybe 40, in a Carhartt jacket and a Packers hat. His rifle wasn't pointed at me, but it wasn't not pointed at me either. "6 people. 6. How elderly?" "70s and 80s. One walks with a cane. One had a stroke 6 months ago. One—" I stopped. I had been about to say, "One is on oxygen," and then I remembered I would not have to say that anymore. He watched my face. Whatever he saw in it, he made some decision about. "I got a Suburban, 8 seats. It's my dad's. He's inside. He's not coming out." "I'm not driving you anywhere. I'll loan it. You bring it back if you can. You don't if you can't. My dad's not going to need it." "Why?" "Why what?" "Why help me?" He picked the coffee cup back up. He looked past me toward the road. "My mother was at Pinecrest, in Merrill. I called there 4 hours ago. Nobody picked up. So you tell me." I didn't say anything. He nodded once. "Suburban's around back. Keys are in it." There's a half tank. There's a case of water in the cargo. There's a shotgun in the back seat with a box of shells. You take it. You don't bring it back. Go get your people. I'll watch the road." I went. I don't remember the walk back. I remember being at the door of the lodge and Walt opening it before I knocked and saying, "Well?" And I remember saying, "Suburban, 2 miles, now." And I remember the residents standing up one by one without questions because they had been waiting and they had been ready. I left Mr. Doby on the couch under the blanket. I left the lodge unlocked because it didn't matter. I left the generator running because I didn't have the heart to turn it off, even though I knew it was a beacon, because turning it off felt like turning him off too, and I had already done that once tonight. We walked the half-mile of the drive in the cold gray light. Earl with his cane, Walt holding Mrs. Lehrman's elbow, Vi holding Della's hand. Inola behind, with the mag light even though we didn't need it. Hepzibah at my side, her case in her hand, walking faster than I would have guessed she could. At the road, the man was waiting with the Suburban running in the driveway. He didn't get out. He nodded to me through the windshield. I nodded back. The residents loaded one by one. I helped Mrs. Lehrman into the front because her knees were the worst. The seats were warm. The radio was on, low, a voice reading a long list of place names. I got in the driver's seat. I put my hand on the gear shift. I looked at the man on the porch. He raised his hand. I raised mine. The Suburban had 3/4 of a tank. I pulled onto the road. I went north because north was the only direction I had ever been going. The radio voice was reading place names, and after each one it said, "Not accessible, not accessible, not accessible," in the same flat tone, like a librarian reading off overdue books. I let it go. I didn't have the energy to find another station. In the rear view, Earl was watching out the back window. Walt was watching the side. Enola had her flashlight in her lap, off. Vi had Della's head on her shoulder. Mrs. Lehrman was murmuring to her bag. Hepzibah was looking forward, through the windshield, at the road ahead. Mrs. Lehrman said, "Where are we going, dear?" I said, "I don't know yet, Mrs. L." She said, "All right." The road curved. The trees opened. The sun came up over a hill on our right, low and red, and lit the inside of the Suburban with a color I had not expected to see again. The radio voice kept reading. The Suburban hummed under us, smooth where the van had been rough. The frost on the fields glittered and melted in patches where the sun touched them and stayed white where it didn't. A mile on, a truck was stopped sideways across both lanes. There was no driver. The doors were open. I slowed. I steered around it on the shoulder. Past the truck, the road was empty again, going on in a long, shallow curve into pine country, and somewhere past that into the country I had been calling north for hours, without knowing what I meant by it. In the rear view, Hepzibah caught my eye. She didn't say anything. She nodded once, the way she had nodded at the question about her case. I nodded back. I put my hand into my left jacket pocket and found the wren and held it. I watched the road. The radio voice read, Mosinee, not accessible. Wausau, not accessible. Antigo, and stopped, like the person reading had to take a breath, and then went on. Antigo, not accessible. And I thought about Mr. Doby on the couch under the blanket, and I thought about Penna at the second-floor window with her hand raised, and I thought about how a person can do everything wrong and still arrive somewhere, and how a person can do everything right and not. The road curved again. The sun cleared the hill. Ahead, far off, where the road met the horizon, I could see something I couldn't yet identify. A shape that might have been a roadblock, or might have been a line of trucks, or might have been people, walking toward us in the cold, slow, in the loose unevenness I had now seen enough times to know. I did not slow down yet. I did not speed up. I kept my hands on the wheel. The Suburban hummed. The residents breathed. The radio read another name and then another. I drove toward whatever it was. There was nothing to do but see what it was when we got there. Hepzibah said, quietly, "Rennie." "Yeah." "Whatever it is, just keep moving until you can't." "Yeah," I said. "Okay." I kept moving.